Hello, welcome to another tonalist landscape oil painting demonstration. This is your painter in residence, M. Francis McCarthy. And the painting I'm bringing you today is the second in our series of limited pigment studies. So this is what we're doing. It's yellow ochre. Yellow ochre is the star of the show. And we are creating a painting with just yellow ochre, white, it's titanium white in this case, and ivory black, or maybe lamp black. Either way, it's a bone black. Yeah, so a transparent black, and this is going to become significant when I get a little further into the video when I'm talking about transparency and opaqueness. Now, yellow ochre, I'm going to be reading a few things, but I'll start off with my experience of yellow ochre. I did not start off painting with yellow ochre. I started off painting with a limited palette that consisted of cadmium yellow, alizarin crimson, titanium white, a phthalo type green or Windsor green, and ultramarine blue. That's what I was working with, and I would mix all my colors from that. And I was definitely under the influence of some painters whose books I had gotten, and I was really lucky to get that, because I think having a limited palette, starting with a limited palette, is extremely valuable. What I started adding, though, because I was interested in landscape painting just about exclusively, yellow ochre is one of the first colors I added because it's so useful for landscape painting. It's basically the color of your dead dry grass. It's brilliant in skies. As you are modulating towards the horizon, you want to lighten it. We'll mix it to blue, but or the blue and the white, I should say. And it has a tendency not to go as green in the sky as as you might think it would. It's also, it's a very, very opaque pigment. There's a lot of times on my palette where I won't reach for white. I might reach for yellow ochre if I need some opacity in my blend, because it's very, very, very opaque. And let's go from there. We're going to start off with Gamblin. Doesn't give you a lot of information, but Gamblin is my favorite paint company. To be honest with you, I actually use most of my yellow ochre is a fairly pale form of yellow ochre that is Daler Rowney Georgian brand, which is actually a student grade of paint, and it's the only student grade pigment on my palette. And my logic there is that yellow ochre is basically clay. It's dirt. It's cheap. There's not a big difference between a student grade with a super cheap pigment and an expensive color. Like if you are going to buy a student grade of, say, cadmium yellow, it's probably cadmium yellow hue. It doesn't even have actual cadmium yellow in it, because cadmium yellow is very expensive pigment to produce. Yeah. So let's go and see what Gamblin has to say. Interestingly, Gamblin has the yellow ochres grouped with their earth pigments, not in their yellow section. I like how they say this. This modest yet valuable earth color has been on painters' palettes since painting began. Pure hydrated yellow iron oxide, goethite, indispensable for naturalistic color mixing. Natural hydrated iron oxide is PY43. The light fastness is 100% light fast, and it is semi-transparent. Maybe theirs is. I don't think most yellow ochres I've run into are very leaning towards quite opaque. But hey, it's maybe not as opaque as titanium white. Yeah. Interesting that they would class it that way. And funny, when I was mentioning it, most of the earth pigments do tend to be semi-transparent. I'm looking at burnt sienna, burnt umber, raw umber. Those are all semi-transparent colors. Raw sienna. Actually, that quadrant of 4 colors I'll be doing, I have 5 earth pigments on my palette, so you can tell I'm a big believer in them. Yeah, I actually have burnt sienna, burnt umber, raw sienna, raw umber, and yellow ochre on my palette, and they're probably always going to be on my palette. Those are all very useful colors. Raw sienna I can get away with not using. I would kind of tend to, in fact, a lot of yellow ochres would just go right into that raw sienna tone. On my palette, because the yellow ochre I use is so pale, raw sienna has been filling a nice little niche, and you'll be seeing a raw sienna demo, I believe is the next one coming up, and it's really cool. Before I get into a bit more about the yellow ochre, I want to mention that you notice I'm doing this painting on a primed board. It was primed with a little bit of I think burn umber, probably a little yellow ochre in there. One thing is, though, I normally do not. You can see the grain on the board. It's a pine panel, by the way. The grain on the board is running vertical, and that's usually kiss of death. But it worked out fine on this one. I thought it might because of the extreme vertical nature of that tree. But that's just something to watch out for. I don't recommend it. I'm doing it here, and it worked out. I got very lucky. But there were several other scenes I had composited. I basically I've waited to paint them until I could prep boards where the grain is going the same direction as the horizon is generally what you want. And I knew this painting was going to fall together. I got a really beautiful tone with the yellow ochre mixed with the black. It wasn't as green as I thought it was going to be. I should point out, by the way, though, that I'm not actually using the Daler Rowney yellow ochre here. I'm using a yellow ochre from Old Holland, which is a bit deeper and richer in tone, because I knew that would work better for the painting. Yeah. But this is definitely one of the more successful looking paintings in the series. Although I have to say now I'm getting my head wrapped around the white. When the white hits some of these earth colors, like burnt sienna, you're just talking pink, you're talking flesh tones. Anyway, I digress. Let's get back into Pigments Through the Ages. It's webexhibits.org. They have a nice little paragraph here. Brief description of yellow ochre. Earth tones from cream to brown. Yellow ochre is a natural mineral consisting of silica and clay owing to its color to an iron oxyhydroxide mineral, goethite. It's found throughout the world in many shades and hues from yellow to brown. The best brown ochre comes from Cyprus. Used throughout history, this permanent pigment can be safely mixed with other pigments. Synthetic yellow ochre, Mars yellow, have been made since the early 1920s. Today, synthetic yellow ochre is used extensively by the paint, plastics, and other industries. That might be interesting to play with that Mars yellow. Although, you know, what would you have? You'd probably have an additional bit of opacity. And, you know, this is the part of the video where I'm going to talk about what I was doing yesterday, which was the burnt sienna study, and I was struggling, and because I was struggling because I had burnt sienna, which is only semi-opaque. I had titanium white. When it hits the burnt sienna, it just gives you pink, and I had ivory black, which is very transparent, and I was definitely struggling until I dug out a tube of Mars black, and everything started coming together. And that's definitely going to be a player in the rest of this series, because having that opaque black gave me a lot more flexibility with how I could treat things. Since I was out of the realms of transparency and well into the realms of opacity, it just served me to be opaque with my black. And I've been talking a lot about transparency versus opacity in your pigments, and it's just part of my progression of as an artist, just seeing how important and really valuable that is in a lot of the effects that you can create. And you know, a lot of times you just don't realize, because you know, I've got black on my palette and it's transparent. It always does the things I know it's going to do, but it's not till I get into a situation that's for me abnormal, like forcing myself to work with one pigment and black and white only. I've never done that before this year, my friend, never. And it's been very interesting. I have to say, the painting I did yesterday came out great. I think this one came out great. This one I wasn't too worried about. I just knew yellow ochre was going to get along with the black pretty well. I thought it might be going greener than it did, and I think it would have done if I hadn't have gone with that tube of Old Holland yellow ochre I have in my box. I think that greenness might have been a lot more of a problem with the paler yellow ochre that I use from Daler Rowney. So a lot of variance in the yellow ochre, but I have to say it's a super flexible color, and as I indicated earlier, It's when I need to bring in some opacity, say to a green or something I just don't want white anywhere near. Because let's face it, every color you add white to becomes some form of pastel. And that's not always something you want in your painting, especially down in the ground portion of your painting. It can certainly not be a problem if in a limited palette scenario like we're looking at here, and we'll be looking at in the rest of the series. But I would generally avoid it. White wouldn't be my choice. If I would do a painting that was going to have a whole sienna feel, I would have brought in a yellow. Normally, without any thought or hesitation. The idea of using a white instead, pretty crazy, but it's working out. Let's see if we can give you any other information, yellow ochre. Well, you almost know everything you need to know. It's super useful. We don't care about microsamples, or what do we got here? We'll skip all that. We don't. Although I have to say, you go, yeah, I don't care what it looks like under a microscope. I don't care. You might not, but these things are having an effect on what you're doing. To me, I think some guys, they get way too into the pigments to the point where they're going out and digging up spoonfuls of dirt and adding some linseed oil and making paintings, and good on them. But I mean, at the end of the day, no one's going to care where that pigment came from. They're going to care that the painting looks good, and they're definitely going to care that the painting is lasting and not fading. I mean, there's a situation like Van Gogh's got with his sunflowers, where they were far more brilliant yellow earlier in the 20th century, but they're fading, and they're fading pretty rapidly. And he would have done these paintings just before the turn of the 20th century, like 1870, I think is when he was working, 1880. So, if we were to say when he was reaching for that tube of yellow, you're going to be really the most popular artist on the planet, but this painting you're doing is going to be crushing people's spirits because it's fading and there's not much they can do about it. Are you sure you want to grab that yellow? Maybe there's another yellow that would work nearly as well, that'll be more permanent or have properties. There's always trade-offs. In my view, everything I do is a permanent pigment. I don't mess with anything that's not light fast. 100% light fast, I have to say. But after that, like, oh, you saw, is my mind closed to Mars yellow? No, it's not closed. It might have some unique properties. I will say though, I think we've got maybe another 10 paintings to do or something like that in this series. I'm about 4 or 5 deep in right now. And I'm getting real excited because I have some things set up that are just, I can't wait to paint. They're going to look so awesome. They're going to look awesome. And I'm getting excited. I'm thinking, ooh, maybe I could look at some other colors I could do. And so I go to Gambleen's site, and they've got, what's great about Gamblin is they've got everything organized well. And I'm looking through the colors. It's like, no, I don't need to do another color that looks like burnt sienna that's not burnt sienna, which would be transparent earth red. It has different properties, and I'm aware of them, but would it matter once it hits the opacity of that white? No, not at all, So I have to say that the palette that I have, I think, is extremely strong. My palette has got pretty much every color I would need to execute almost anything I would need to do. The exception might be, say, if I was getting into some floral stuff where I wanted some certain types of magenta tones or some variants into purples or whatever. That might be a different case. Anyway, I can see we're getting close to the end. Tip on over to my website. Check it out, landscapepainter.co.nz. I got some awesome paintings in the store. And people have been sending me donations. Those of you that have, you're heroes. As far as I'm concerned, you're some of the best human beings the planet's ever produced. And thank you so much. My favorite way to be supported, however, is people buying my paintings. But you can also join the membership area. There's a much more extensive version of this painting there. Until I come back with another video, though, do me a favor, take good care and stay out of trouble.